April 4th, 1968. Memphis, Tennessee. The evening air is cool and still. On the balcony of the Lorraine Motel, a 39-year-old preacher leans against an iron railing, joking with the men in the parking lot below. He has come to this city to stand with sanitation workers, men who carry signs that read, simply, "I am a man." He does not know that across the street, in the window of a cheap rooming house, a rifle is rising toward his face. In our universe, the next sound is a single gunshot, and the world is never the same. But what if it missed? What if Martin Luther King Jr. lived not for 5 more minutes, but for 50 more years? What if the greatest moral voice of the 20th century walked off that balcony alive and one day walked into the White House? This is that history. To understand the world that might have been, we must first remember the world that was. By the spring of 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was exhausted. In just 13 years, he had risen from a Montgomery pulpit to the world stage. He had led a bus boycott that broke segregation on the buses of Alabama. He had faced down police dogs and fire hoses in Birmingham. He had stood before 250,000 people at the Lincoln Memorial and told them of his dream. At 35, he had become the youngest man ever to win the Nobel Peace Prize. But by 1968, the dream was changing. And so was the man. King had turned his gaze from segregation to something deeper and far more dangerous to the powerful: poverty itself. He condemned the war in Vietnam as immoral. He was organizing a poor people's campaign to bring thousands of the nation's destitute, black, white, and brown together, to camp in the shadow of the Capitol until Washington listened. Many had loved him when he spoke of dreams. Now that he spoke of money, of empire, of the redistribution of wealth, they turned cold. His approval ratings fell. Newspapers that once praised him called him naive. Or, worse, the FBI tracked his every step and tapped his every phone. Then, in Memphis, it ended. At 6:01, as King stood on the balcony of room 306, a shot rang out. The bullet struck him in the right cheek and tore through his spine. An hour later, he was pronounced dead at St. Joseph's Hospital. He was 39 years old. The nation convulsed. Riots erupted in more than 100 cities. Smoke rose over Washington itself, within sight of the White House. A movement built on nonviolence watched its profit cut down by violence. And for millions, something irreplaceable was torn away. We have spent every year since wondering what we lost. That is our history. Now, let us change one thing. 6:00, 1 minute past. King leans over the railing to speak to the musician Ben Branch, asking him to play an old hymn that night, "Take My Hand, Precious Lord." In our world, that turn lifted his jaw into the rifle's path. But imagine that. In this world, he bends down just a few inches further to call a question to the courtyard below, to brace a hand against the rail. The rifle cracks. The bullet splinters the doorframe where his head had been a heartbeat before. Chaos. His aides throw him to the concrete. Police flood the rooming house across the street. But Martin Luther King Jr. rises, shaken, bleeding from a splinter across his cheek, and alive. By morning, the photograph is on every front page on Earth. King at a microphone, a small bandage on his face, declaring in that unmistakable voice that no bullet can kill an idea whose time has come. The assassination attempt does not silence him. It makes him something close to untouchable. Survival changes the man, and it changes the movement. The Poor People's Campaign, which in our timeline collapsed into mud and confusion after his death, now marches under his living command. In the summer of 1968, Resurrection City rises on the National Mall. Thousands of tents, thousands of the forgotten poor, and King is there every single day in the rain, refusing to leave. The wave of public sympathy after the attempt on his life swells the camp into the hundreds of thousands. Congress, terrified of the spectacle and moved by the moment, passes the first major anti-poverty guarantees in a generation. King's moral authority is now beyond challenge. He stands against the war in Vietnam as the war grows more hated by the month. Where once his opposition cost him friends, Now the whole country begins, slowly, to catch up to where he had stood all along. By the early 1970s, a generation of young Americans, black and white, anti-war and pro-labor, looks to King not merely as a preacher, but as a man who might wield real power. He resists. He is a man of the pulpit, he says, not of the polls. But the question grows louder and harder to answer. If not him, then who? The turning point comes in 1974. The nation is reeling from Watergate. A president has resigned in disgrace. Faith in government has collapsed to ashes. Americans are hungry, desperate for a leader they can finally believe in. In our universe, that vacuum was filled by a soft-spoken peanut farmer from Georgia named Jimmy Carter, who promised the country he would never lie to it. But in this universe, there is a louder voice in Georgia, a voice that has been telling hard truths at the constant risk of his life for 20 years. In the winter of 1975, from the pulpit of Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, the same church where he was baptized as a boy, Martin Luther King Jr. announces that he will seek the presidency of the United States. He runs not as a black candidate, he insists, but as the candidate of what he calls the coalition of conscience close corner bracket, the poor of every color, the worker, the veteran sick of war, the young, the faithful. It is an idea his allies had long imagined, a rainbow coalition, stitched together across every line that America had used to keep its people apart. It is the most explosive campaign in the history of the Republic. The forces against him are immense. Segregationist Democrats storm out of the party. Death threats arrive by the sackful. Officials in some states vow he will never appear on their ballots at all. But King possesses something no rival can match: a national army of churches, unions, and student groups, already built and battle-tested across 2 decades of struggle. His rallies fill stadiums, and the same voice that moved 250,000 souls at the Lincoln Memorial now reaches into living rooms across the country through the cold eye of the television camera. He speaks to white coal miners in West Virginia about the dignity of labor. He speaks to auto workers in Detroit and farmhands in the Central Valley. Improbably, agonizingly, the coalition holds. In Indianapolis, a second gunman is wrestled to the ground in a crowd before he can fire. The near miss is broadcast across the nation that night, and instead of frightening his supporters away, it hardens their resolve. They have seen with their own eyes exactly what King has risked for them, and they will not be turned back. In the Democratic primaries of 1976, the party establishment splits its votes among a dozen cautious men. King, with his unshakable base, wins state after state. At a convention that stretches through ballot after ballot deep into the night, the impossible finally becomes real. Martin Luther King Jr. accepts the nomination of the Democratic Party for President of the United States. That November, against a Republican Party still crippled by the wreckage of Watergate, the preacher from Atlanta wins. On January 20th, 1977, Martin Luther King Jr. lays his hand on his grandmother's worn Bible and becomes the 39th President of the United States, 32 years before Barack Obama. His presidency is no fairy tale. A hostile Congress blocks much of what he asks for. An economy battered by oil shocks resists his ambitions at every turn. He governs a nation where tens of millions did not vote for him, and where some will never, ever accept him. But the changes come. He signs a Full Employment Act, pledging honest work to any American who seeks it. He launches a national health program decades before its time. He brings the last advisors home from Southeast Asia and turns the Cold War's vast budget toward what he calls the war against want. Open corner bracket. He appoints to the federal bench judges who look like the whole of America for the first time. And around the world, the symbolism is seismic. The face of American power is no longer a general or a millionaire. It is a man who was jailed in Birmingham, stoned in Chicago, and shot at in Memphis. To the poor and the colonized across the earth, the word America suddenly carries a new and startling meaning. But the backlash is just as real. A wounded and resentful opposition hardens against him, convinced the country has been stolen from them. The old segregationist wing of the Democratic Party flees for good. and a furious conservative movement gathers strength, vowing to undo every law he signs. King governs in the eye of a hurricane, adored by half the nation, despised by the other half, and granted not a single quiet day. The America that emerges is not a country with its divisions healed. It is a country forced, decades early, to look its oldest wound in the face and finally argue about it out loud. He serves in this telling 2 full terms. He grows old, something our universe never allowed him to do. The man who in our world died at 39 lives to see his children grown, his hair gone gray, and his dream written into the law of the land. We cannot know, of course, if it would have unfolded just this way. Perhaps the hatred that fired that rifle would have found another window, another day. Perhaps a king presidency would have fractured the country as deeply as it healed it. History is not a machine that runs on certainties. It is a storm. But this much we know for certain. In our universe, a single bullet ended a single life, and the world has mourned that loss for more than half a century. In another universe, just a few inches away, that same bullet struck nothing but a wooden doorframe, and a man who dreamed aloud of the mountaintop lived long enough to stand upon it. This is historically parallel.